Hey, what's up? My name is Evan Schneider. Welcome back to another video. Today in this video, we're going to be talking about the 7Artisans Hope Series 25mm Cine prime lens. And that is exactly what I'm shooting this shot on right now, as well as all the footage that you'll see in the video, other than the shots of the actual lenses, which I had to use a different lens to film this lens. 7Artisans sent me this lens to test and to keep for this video. No money was exchanged in making this video, and the first time that they're seeing this video is the first time that you're seeing it as well. Now, this lens is part of a set of Cine prime lenses. There's a 10mm, 16mm, 25mm, 35mm, 50mm, and 85mm in the set. They come in Sony E-mount, Fuji X, Micro Four Thirds, and Canon RF, and they have APS-C coverage. They come in a black version, which is what I have, but they also come in a titanium finish if you're interested in that as well. So before I talk about kind of the results of my testing and more of the fine details, I just wanted to talk about kind of what budget Cine lenses mean in the market today. Now, I think they've really introduced a new kind of toolkit that filmmakers can use that wasn't really accessible when Cine lenses, if you wanted to buy one, were, tens of thousands of dollars, a lot more expensive, and all of us were shooting video on photo lenses. Now, there's nothing wrong with shooting video on photo lenses. I do it all the time. There's benefits to photo lenses and there's benefits to Cine lenses, but in terms of video, Cine lenses do have a lot of benefits if you're interested in using them. Rigging out a smaller, compact Cine lens that fits your budget is a really compelling thing to consider. One benefit is the focus gears, so you can hook up a follow focus. The other benefit is that the entire lens system uses T-stops, which is a more standard measurement of how much light is coming through the lens. You can be sure that if you're shooting on the 25mm at T1.2 and then you want to punch in using the 50mm, you won't have to change any of your exposure settings, which is very convenient for video. Personally, when 7Artisans reached out to me to test one of these lenses, I decided to choose the 25mm because on the X-H2S, that's one of my favorite focal lengths in the 24-25mm range. I feel like it's a good balance between not being too wide, but not being too close up, and I can get a wide variety of different shots using that focal length. All right, so first, let's just talk about build quality of this lens. So this lens has an all metal construction. It's very durable. It feels very nice in your hand. It doesn't feel cheap at all. There's no plastic. It's actually kind of cold to the touch when you pick it up. The lens cap, I really love. It just kind of fits over the top. They have pretty nice branding on them. I like the look of them. They're very compact and they're pretty lightweight for the size. I'm not sure if they're weather sealed, but they do have a really high quality feel to them. So next, let's talk about focus control. So the focus ring is, like I said, it's already geared because it's a Cine lens. So it's a little bit difficult to pull focus just using your hand because the ring is a little bit small. And it also has a 260-degree focus throw. So that means if you're doing a rack focus, you're really gonna have to move your hand around, and you're probably gonna have to reposition it halfway if you're going from the close distance to the far distance. However, it does kind of necessitate the use of some sort of follow focus, either manual gear or like the DJI LiDAR follow focus, something like that, which means that you're going to have to rig out your camera a little bit more if you're using a lens like this. But it's totally worth it, especially if you're using the DJI LiDAR system, because then you can have autofocus with this lens, even though it's a manual Cine lens. Okay, so color rendering on this lens, it was really interesting because when I tested this lens against other ones that I have, like the Sigma Art series, 18-35 f1.8, and I also tested it against the Sirui Nightwalker 24mm f1.2, and this 25mm f2.1, I can't speak to the consistency across the entire lens set, but the color rendering on it actually came in a little bit warmer and a little bit more towards the green tone, which I actually kind of prefer and I actually kind of like. It gave it kind of a more cinematic quality. I like the warm tones. It felt really nice. The colors look really pleasing and they pop really well. And it seems to me that it has very accurate color rendering across the entire frame field of view of the lens. So one of the most surprising things that I found out about this lens in my testing is actually how sharp this lens is. I wasn't really expecting it because when you use a set of Cine lenses, you kind of expect them to have more character and to be a little bit less sharp. But when I compared this lens to my Sigma 18-35 and I zoomed that lens into 25 millimeters, between the two, the 7Artisans lens actually seemed a tiny bit sharper. In my testing, I noticed very minimal chromatic aberration on the sides, which was really nice. It's pretty clean. There seems to be a very subtle yellow on top, blue on bottom if you do see any chromatic aberration, which I think is a lot more pleasing than kind of the green magenta shift that some other lenses do. It kind of blends into your footage a little bit more, so even when you're all the way open at T1.2, it's still pretty clean. This lens also has very little distortion on the edges. There's really no vertical distortion at all. Maybe on some horizontal lines on the top or bottom, you might see a tiny bit, but I really only noticed that when I was filming literally a graph with the lens. So in most cases, you're not really gonna see it. And it actually makes this lens a great option for interviews or architectural stuff, real estate videos, interviews, straight on compositions, stuff like that. In terms of vignetting, on the APS-C sensor, I didn't notice a whole lot of vignetting. This lens is pretty clean to the edges, and so you're not gonna see a whole lot of vignetting with it. I tested the focus breathing on this lens. The focus breathing is pretty minimal as well. There's not a whole lot of it, which I think is one of the benefits of using this lens is when you're pulling focus, especially if you're at T1.2 and you're doing a really long rack focus, you're not gonna notice the lens breathing very much, which some people like that, some people don't like it, some people don't mind focus breathing, but in my mind, I think focus breathing is a little bit distracting, and so it's nice to see that that's pretty minimal with this lens. I tested the lens flares on this lens, and they're actually pretty nice. I think the lens coating kind of eliminates a lot of the flaring that happens, so it doesn't have a whole lot of flaring, but when it does, it's not super distracting, and when you're pointing straight at it, it's pretty smooth. The only thing I noticed is that when you're really stopped down on the lens, there are little kind of random dots that appear a little bit when you get a lens flare. Just something to be aware of if you're stopped down really far so that you minimize those little dots. So I tested this lens against the Sirui Nightwalker 24mm T1.2 lens. Typically with the Nightwalkers, since they open up to T1.2, when you do that, you can get a little bit of softness. So typically when I use those lenses, I'm actually stopping down a little bit to T2.1 or T2.8 anyways. You're not really missing out on a whole lot of the benefit of T1.2, whereas with this one, when you're open at T2.1, it's very sharp. All the way open. So in terms of color rendering between this 25mm and the Nightwalker 24mm, the color rendering on this lens I thought was a lot more pleasing and a lot more accurate. So I would prefer the Hope series. This lens also, like I said, has less chromatic aberration when shot at wide open, which is really nice. I also noticed that this lens is much sharper than the Sirui Nightwalker lens, so I prefer this lens in terms of sharpness as well. And I would say that the 7Artisans 25mm has softer bokeh, which is a little bit less distracting. The edges are a bit softer, and I feel like it has a little bit more of a pleasing quality to it than the Nightwalker lenses. Like I mentioned before in this video, I also compared it to the Sigma Art Series 18-35 f1.8 lens, which is a photo lens and it's also a zoom lens, but I do love that lens. It's my go-to lens. So I zoomed that one to 25mm, and I actually found, like I said, that this one is actually sharper than the 18-35. The 7Artisans had a little bit more blooming in the highlights compared to the Sigma 18-35, which I actually don't mind. I actually kind of like the blooming in the highlights. And this 25mm had a little bit of a warmer and a little bit of a nicer color rendering image quality to it. The Sigma is nice, but the 7Artisans just has this nice warm look that I really like. This lens is definitely one of my go-to lenses now. I really like it. I really like the sharpness of it. I like that there's no distortion on the edges. I like that it's a Cine lens and it opens to T2.1. The size, everything, like, yeah, it's a great little lens. If this is your first Cine lens that you're considering, I would say that you should consider the extra rigging that you're going to have to do if you do use a Cine lens, especially if you're filming yourself where you can't use autofocus. You're gonna have to set the focus or use some sort of LiDAR system to add autofocus capability. And I think just for the price, like the price really sells this entire set of lenses. Even if you're just purchasing one, the cost to value ratio of these lenses, you're getting so much value at such a low cost that it makes them a really compelling piece of gear to purchase for your toolkit. So I think if you're looking for a nice budget Cine lens or a nice set of budget Cine lenses, this is one of the best ways to go. And I think they strike a really good balance between the cost, the features, and the image quality that you're going to get. I graded all of the shots that you can see in this video using my F-Log 2 LUTs that you can purchase on LUTcompany.com. I also sell S-Log 3 LUTs there, Canon LUTs, Apple Log, as well as a Super 8 emulation called Fake 8 Film Lab. If you're interested, check it out at LUTcompany.com. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.